Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
All right, so let's kick it off. I'm going to be talking a little bit about myself to begin with, then some of the points on Tabula Rasa specifically, the company that we started a couple years back and that's hosting this conference. And then I'll get into a little bit about, how can we approach this space in regards to impacts when we're trying to intersect both finance and entrepreneurship. And then hoping to close with just some thoughts on the space, things that I feel like are not being talked about, being overlooked a little bit, and things that we should be paying a bit more attention to. So to give you a little bit of an intro on myself, I was born outside of the country in Crimea. It's the disputed region between the Ukraine and Russia. I came when I was quite young to the United States and grew up in a community primarily for refugees, focused on assimilating, and helping individuals progress and transition into American life. From a pretty young age, I was very involved in a variety of advocacy efforts. So I started contributing to communities of disability, moved into interfaith activism, where I spent about 7 years of time contributing. And then around 5 years ago, had this opportunity to be able to go and contribute to a very different type of advocacy movement that I really began to think more about and kind of set me onto the path that I am currently on today. And that first move was into the sex worker rights movement. So I was in my first year at the Yale School of Management. I was pursuing an MBA after finishing a computer engineering degree. And I had been reading a lot about the adult industry specifically, and came across several articles that just made me realize, there was so much technology being built specifically for consumers in the adult industry, but there was actually very little, technology as well as companies focusing on specifically the sex worker rights movement and helping sex workers, adult film stars being able to have greater leverage in the industry that they functioned in. And so I was still very interested in advocacy. I had this, engineering degree, and felt that this was actually a really great place for me to plug into, and instead of really seeking to build things for the consumer market, be able to actually build things for the advocacy side of things and the performer side of the industry. After a couple of years of doing that, I had an opportunity to actually transition into the decentralized governance space in blockchain. I contributed to companies like Aragon and Democracy Earth there, companies that really helped me form a language around what it meant to decentralize and also just have greater autonomy in the structuring of society and self-governance in general. It was a great set of tools to be able to understand some of the problems that were happening throughout the sex worker rights movement and some of the tangible steps we could be taking to really make that movement more effective as well. After that, I was returning back to business school. I had taken several years off and decided to begin exploring the potential for capital, for entrepreneurship, to be able to help out in the creation of the psychedelics ecosystem, which was still not really formed. Companies like Field Trip didn't exist. Companies like MindMed hadn't formed yet. This was back in 2018. And in summer of 2018. And so we were very early on, but we were seeing that there was already, some articles talking about Compass and things like that. And for us, we were taking classes focused on venture capital. The Yale School of Management is specifically focused on impact and nonprofits, social entrepreneurship. It's the top rated school specifically for nonprofit management, which is actually why I went there. And so I started, really exploring what it would look like to build, a healthy psychedelics ecosystem that could really prioritize community members within the space, that could really contribute to the healthy growth of entrepreneurship within the psychedelics ecosystem. And paired up with a professor of venture capital, and we started exploring what that meant and what it was like to build it. We started meeting entrepreneurs who were already in the space, and later entrepreneurs who came along, at Field Trip and MindMed and all of those folks on the way, and really saw that there were a lot of companies that we could invest in. We had the opportunity to invest in Compass and Atai, Field Trip, MindMed, all of these other companies. But for us, I think that we were really looking to be a little bit more slow paced, take our time and see what did it mean to actually introduce impact in a really meaningful, tangible way to investment within this ecosystem. And so we took our time. We didn't rush anything. We didn't necessarily direct our investor network towards those investments. And we waited for better opportunities. And in 2020, at the beginning of this year, we actually stumbled across Maya Health. David Champion spoke a little bit earlier today. And that was the first company that we really decided that, this is a company that we want to support, that we want to back, that we feel could yield, a high return, but is also extremely impact focused and is doing meaningful work for the space. And that journey was laid with many different questions of ethics within the psychedelics ecosystem. I think a lot of times when we have conversations, especially people hear the word VC and are automatically scared. But I think that there's ways that as a VC and as a financier within this ecosystem, we are trying to be extremely conscious of the ways that we deploy capital, of the ways that we support startups, et cetera. So for instance, when it comes to balancing a portfolio, right, you have a 10-year fund. And for those of you who might not know as much about venture capital, you have a pool of money, let's say that you have $10 million. You're trying to invest that over a variety of different startups. Some of those startups will go public. Some of those startups will be bought out by other companies. And really, that's what a VC firm is waiting for. They're waiting for a company that you bought a chunk out of to be sold off so that you can get the returns of that sale. And so for us, when we're thinking about balancing a portfolio, for instance, there's certain companies that don't necessarily have the same negative externalities as others when you rush their development. So certain companies that, for instance, really touch the consumer. So a consumer packaged good, a microdosing product, possibly, a clinic that is directly facing consumers. Those are types of companies that when you're rushing their growth, there's a few things that you're compromising on. You're launching marketing campaigns that are really trying to acquire users as fast as possible. You're focusing on traction. You're really trying to cut costs as well to be able to take that and be able to provide that service for more people. Sometimes, if you're venture funded, you're really trying to still exist on a shoestring type of budget. And so those are types of companies that we wanted to, be able to invest in, but give them more time to be able to grow and develop, not giving them, the pressure to, have and yield a return to be sold or to IPO within the first, 2 to 3 years. But we also had to generate a return for our investors and do that on a quicker time scale. And so the types of companies that we were really looking for to bring to the beginning of our portfolio were companies that were significantly more software and technology focused, companies that you could scale the growth of quickly, that were more, business to business, that, could develop high quality products for businesses to be able to choose between, that could plug into clinics, that could plug into research facilities and be used as the infrastructure of this ecosystem, generating those returns still quickly, allowing for them to grow fast and not necessarily putting those negative externalities on the end consumer. So those were, a couple of the things that we thought about in regards to portfolio balancing. And just to give a little bit of light in regards to some of the darker sides of this industry and how it can turn out. I think we're talking a lot about oh well, maybe we'll rush things and there won't necessarily be the best industry because we're going to take things to market too quickly, and there will be irresponsible delivery that happens. I think that there is also a lot to say about how basically you have these different types of companies coming to the forefront and being able to have partnerships and align themselves with a variety of different companies. So one thing that we could see, for instance, is retreat centers being able to partner with a company like Coca-Cola, right? And having Coca-Cola putting its branded products within a retreat center and allowing for individuals who are in a greater state of, impressionability, a greater state of neuroplasticity, actually being able to engage with these compounds in a way that is, extremely harmful, because now they have all of these impressions through this advertising, through the sponsorship that actually comes in. So there's a lot of ethics that need to be developed, and there's a lot of groups that are working on these things, like North Star, like Guild of Guides, that are really looking at, what are the ethics of creating intelligent retreat centers that are really doing the work necessary to guide these types of retreats in an ethical way, be able to also, develop business models that are not necessarily prioritizing scalability when it comes to delivering this type of care to individuals directly. The other thing that I think we need to focus on, and there's a lot of kind of overlooking, is things like schizophrenia. So, for instance, there's a whole underground market forming right now. And it's something that a lot of the more above ground individuals and players are not really focused on. We're seeing dozens of new dispensaries popping up month by month that are consistently going and trying to sell dried mushrooms, things like that. And regardless of what you think about an underground market and individuals' abilities to be able to choose for themselves whether they actually take psychedelics or not, there is a responsibility of us as a community to be paying attention to the fact that this is growing rapidly. More people are having access to these compounds. And that means that, especially in unsupervised settings with no screening, we are going to see an uptick in cases of schizophrenia, in cases of split personality and bipolar disorders, just by the fact that that there is an increase in the consumption of these compounds. And so, that's something that we really have to be thinking about, is how do we actually provide the infrastructure for the increased amounts of individuals that will be affected negatively by these substances and be able to support those? I would love to see more nonprofits in the space, focusing on, allocating a portion of their funds and resources to actually being able to support individuals who do have psychedelic experiences and then are unfortunately, launched into states, of greater mental health disparity, because that is something that we'll see from the informal market. And it's something that we'll see from even the formal market over the next couple of decades of time. So another thing that we should really be thinking about and talking about. I think that the other thing is, there seems to be a real lack of research when it comes to anything except the compounds and their interactions with people themselves. So really what's important to consider here is, we have, significant research over the last few decades showing the efficacy of these compounds for specific ailments. What we actually don't have is, how do these compounds intersect in a variety of different settings when it comes to, intersecting with communities and community dynamics, when it comes to how do psychedelics interact with the mainstream when they're introduced into platforms like social media? What happens when there are TikTok challenges that focus on, psychedelics and taking higher doses, things like that? What are things that we're doing today to introduce rituals and habits that allow for us to mitigate those consequences by doing the research today to see, in kind of controlled settings of exposing, small social media groups to psychedelics, what are the different possibilities and arrays of ways people are using these in healthy ways to spread the message of psychedelics, and also in unhealthy ways to compete with one another to kind of demonstrate machismo in the ability to take higher doses or to just demonstrate what these substances are capable of. If you actually are looking at YouTube trends today, there's already a kind of consumption of psychedelics for entertainment, for people to be able to watch and see very young individuals gaining virality and gaining more viewership just by taking a psychedelic, and allowing for people to watch how they react to that. And that doesn't have to be unhealthy in every setting, but what are the things that we as a community are doing to pay attention to those things, to do the research necessary to understand how that affects, this ecosystem entirely, and be able to mitigate those consequences. And so, and then, finally, kind of in research in regards to a lot of the different places that it can be applied. So most of the psychedelic compounds and the ways that they're being researched and used is for things like, treating a specific ailment. We have very little research in terms of conflict resolution, things like actually allowing for, in difficult regions or war zones, or even between politicians, using things like psychedelic assisted therapies or psychedelic assisted conflict resolution to be able to resolve those things. We have some studies going on underground between Israel and Palestine that we've heard about. People like Rick Doblin have spoken about it, but really the research is pretty early on that front. Also research dealing with, accessibility and access in the space. There's a lot of assumptions about, how what health insurance will, prioritize in regards to making these compounds accessible to individuals. But there's been actually very little, expertise coming in from experts who actually specialize in health insurance within the psychedelics ecosystem talking about these things. I think USONA and some of their team members have actually done a really great job talking about these things. But unfortunately, that's still something that needs to be pushed significantly further. And we really need to do research into, what are the effective infrastructures that we need to build for accessibility in the space, because it's something that we haven't really yet done. So those are just some perspectives on, different pieces of this ecosystem that I wish were being paid a little bit more attention to, that I think we need to be doing a bit more research in to be more effective, to be more conscious, to be more impact driven in all of this, and certain projects that we're trying to support as we go forward in everything that we're building. And yeah, I want to cut it there. I don't want to talk too much about any of our projects. There will be, positions and times throughout the conference where we'll have people speak about some of the research that's being done within Tabula Rasa. But those were just some perspectives on the ecosystem that I thought were valuable in sharing, and happy to answer some questions. Let's see. So speaking of investing ethically in the space, what is your attitude toward the recent wave of RTOs and public offerings? I think that there's a lot that's going on in regards to, in the space, in regards to just kind of quicker pump and dump type schemes that are really trying to IPO as quickly as possible, see a heightened valuation because there's fewer stocks to choose from, and being able to capitalize on that. Whether that's the companies who have successfully done that or just companies that are planning to do that, that's something that, requires a lot of, careful diligencing into the intentions of a company and in terms of where they're going. But I do think that, for us, for instance, and our team internally, when we see a company that's like, we are about to IPO on a Canadian stock exchange, this is something that we're trying to do within the next couple months, that definitely raises red flags for us and makes us really think about, okay, is this company truly authentic? It looks like they incorporated just a couple months ago. Do they really have anything substantial? Why is this process happening so quickly? And what are the real intentions here? So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. Yeah, so can you discuss your progress on Fractal and how this ties into the VC fund? So yeah, Fractal is our industry insights tool. So it's something that we've been working on. We'll be pushing new data and having updates later throughout the conference. So I'm happy to share during the Fractal presentation that Copter will be giving. He'll share a little screenshot of some of the stuff that we built out. Right now, what we're trying to do is build out a really comprehensive industry report that really focuses on all of the different pieces of this ecosystem, of this industry. There are so many different little nuances when it comes to an ecosystem as complex as this. There's, kind of the advocacy side of things. There's the indigenous community side of things. There's, entrepreneurs coming in that have the best intentions and the worst intentions. There's people who are experts who may not have any experience with psychedelics, but are probably the best people to be helping out at this point in time. And so there's a lot of nuances and complexities, and, taking it from a market perspective, a market analysis perspective, taking it from a cultural perspective, and every other angle that, we're trying to really represent in our research and everything that we're trying to do. Also, everything that's going on underground. Again, I can't stress enough of how important it is to be paying attention to the underground and to be thinking of innovative solutions for us to introduce harm reduction to the underground in the best way possible. And there's actually a speaker that we've invited as well, who will be talking about that, too. Let's see. Also on the ethics front, how do you guys approach and think about the development of IP by companies in a space that has historically been genericized? Yeah, this is a really great question. We're really trying to partner with individuals like Rotem Petranker, Thomas Anderson from U of T, doing a lot of research into microdosing, but also fierce advocates of things like open science. We're working in the process right now of seeing what are the different things that we want to align ourselves with to be able to become a public benefit corporation eventually. And so one of the things that we're thinking about is, having one of our statements being, trying not to suppress research in any way within this space. And that's where it gets really tricky. You have, IP that is, really able to incentivize companies to actually fundraise, be able to support their employees, and be able to continue to provide something that's really useful. But then there's also kind of these practices, especially that we saw in cannabis and other kind of more technology-focused industries and pharmaceuticals that are kind of patent grubbing, buying up as much as possible, really limiting people's access, building up these portfolios that keep people out. And kind of like an entire culture of patent strategy that's really meant to create lots of gates and gatekeepers in regards to how people can engage in this space. And that's something that we're actively trying to avoid. It's something that we look at when we're looking at companies, making sure that it's something that we're not supporting. But I do think that there is a place for patents in this space. And I think that that place is, a lot of the speakers today mentioned, if you're really coming up with something that's innovative, that's not necessarily, kneeling on kind of the genericized nature of these compounds, if it's something outside of just, oh, we're trying to really, get as many patents around, psilocybin as possible and just kind of generic psilocybin, it's something that we're not as interested in, but also I don't think it's something that will be as successful for the market. I also think that we're thinking about innovative ways to do patents that don't necessarily have, infinite timelines, that can be, evolved or developed over time and can really be used as more of a foundation for collaborative approaches to the development of entrepreneurship and products in this space. But that's, again, some of these things are extremely complex and things that we're really trying to bring in experts in to help us come up with these ideas and really see what are the limitations, what is possible and what it's not. But really kind of remaining on that foundation of, we know that our intention is to allow for research to continue in this space in the best way possible and really allow for employees to be supported who are bringing these compounds and their associated therapies to individuals, but at the same time being able to have a market that does prioritize collaboration and openness and patience and patient outcomes instead of prioritizing capital gain. So those would be some things there. Can you briefly speak about the legitimate business models that you think that this domain currently has? Yeah. So I mean, I think that a lot of investors are looking at this space, but don't necessarily have a good understanding of what the psychedelic assisted therapy process looks like, and therefore are developing, different business models that are not necessarily as aligned with what this ecosystem actually needs or is going to be effective both in a financial sense as well as kind of an ethics and an impact focused sense as well. I think there's very general ways that we can speak about business models. One specific example I would give is, there's a, kind of a business strategy, I guess, not necessarily a business model, but a business strategy to create functional mushroom brands, for instance, right? Create a functional mushroom brand, use reishi and lion's mane, be able to market that, really grow that as fast as possible. And then when the lights turn on, be able to convert that to a psilocybin providing company. And I think that, companies like that, I think are missing, that they're missing the point a little bit. I think that they're a little bit naive, and apologies if there's folks who are working on functional mushroom brands in the space. I think it's, can be a really great revenue generator. I think you can get revenue quickly. But in terms of a really highly scalable startup that's contributing to the psychedelics ecosystem, I don't think that that's really the best approach for a couple of reasons. I think that any sort of, really recreational market where we can turn on the psilocybin switch, I think it's pretty far away. We heard from Zappy today saying that, and quoting Rick Doblin, which, he said many times that 2035 is really the date for recreational use. So that's really something that I think is much further down the line. And you can have a functional mushroom brand for the next 15 years, maybe for the next 10 years, and then turn on the lights. But there's so many competitors popping up in this space. It's significantly lower barrier. Kind of anyone can start a functional mushroom brand. Brand loyalty is on the downturn for consumer packaged goods. People in my generation and younger just don't necessarily have those same ties to products as older generations might have. So you build up a brand, you put in a lot of money, you pay a lot for acquiring those customers, but those customers are very likely to switch, and there's really nothing tying them too significantly to your brand, because it looks like every other brand, and has its particular color palette and its flair and things like that. So I guess that's an example. In terms of successful business models, what we're looking at is technology-focused companies that can provide services to the psychedelic-assisted therapy process. What can plug into the preparation period, the integration period, the actual psychedelic-assisted therapy process itself. Today we heard from companies like David Champion's Maya. We heard from Mendel's WavePaths. Those are the types of companies we're more excited about, because they have business models that, first off, Mendel's, for instance, can plug into the music therapy space. They don't even need psychedelics to be able to actually continue on, generate revenue, and they've been successful in doing that. At the same time, they're really great for plugging in specifically to the psychedelic-assisted therapy process, and they don't really have, very direct competitors in kind of the formal healthcare industry. There is no company that's really, an expert in facilitating music therapy experiences, to just hospital patients. That's something that's very unique to the psychedelic-assisted therapy process. And if you look at the clinical trials, I believe that it's actually most, or if not all, clinical trials have had a music component to them. So those are things that are important to keep in mind and important to keep educated on, is what is the uniqueness of psychedelic-assisted therapy? And for us, what we're asking is, what are the technologies that can help fit that uniqueness in a particular way? I'm going to answer this last question because we're running out of time, but it is, do you think companies that are actively generating IP in this space have a vested interest in blocking decriminalization movements? That's a hard question to answer. I don't really know whether, that company, those companies, any of those companies are really thinking about, how do we block the decriminalization movements from happening? Because that'll hurt our potential here. I think that, there's oftentimes kind of subconscious dynamics in play that might result in that appearance, but I don't think that anyone is, funding or lobbying against decriminalization movements to be able to, block that and allow for their IP to be more successful, especially because the majority of these founders have had their first experience with psychedelics in an informal market. And so I think that they know just how I guess, hypocritical that would be to do that. So yeah, I think that that's something to keep in mind. I think as we continue onwards, there's going to be more entrepreneurs who are more fiercely advocating against decriminalization, or legalization at least. I think decriminalization and legalization are two different things as well. Like, for instance, Christian Angermeyer was on yesterday. He actually supported decriminalization, but not legalization. And so I actually think that while we're going through decriminalization, we're going to see more support. I think as soon as we get into legalization, maybe we're going to see more outspoken entrepreneurs saying that that's not necessarily a pathway that they want to support. But I think it'll be more out of a genuine idea that the clinical setting is really the best place to be able to mitigate any sort of risk and provide people with the best experience possible. And the optimist in me really believes that the folks who are building many of these things believe that to be true, and that's why they're taking the approach that they're taking. That's it for now. Thank you all for joining us on day 2 of the Psyched 2020 conference. I hope you all have enjoyed the speaker lineup. I think this was a really great day. Yesterday, I was really happy. Today, I think we also just came through and had a lot of incredible folks speaking. So thank you for joining us. We're really, really excited to be hosting you tomorrow as well for a whole nother round of entrepreneurs. These entrepreneurs, many of them are more in the getting started stages, ideation, but they're all building really, really cool startups. And many of them have prototypes or companies that they've already built. So we're excited to be sharing those with you as well. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful night, and we will chat with you soon. Bye-bye.